What if one of the smallest coins in Australian history could become one of the biggest discoveries in your collection? Imagine finding an old Australian 2-cent coin that has been sitting unnoticed in a drawer, an inherited collection, an old box, or even a forgotten jar for decades. At first, you might look at it and think that it is just another old coin worth only a few cents, but then you notice the date. You see 1966. You look at the unusual Australian animal on the reverse. You turn the coin over and see Queen Elizabeth II. Suddenly, you realize that you are looking at one of Australia's very first decimal coins, and this is where today's story begins. The coin we are examining is the 1966 Australian 2-cent coin, a small copper-colored coin that carries an important place in Australian monetary history. But there is an even bigger question surrounding coins like this. Could an exceptionally rare example ever reach an estimated value of $3 million? Is there something hidden in the smallest details that collectors should be looking for? Today, we're going to take a deep journey into the history, design, production, rarity, condition, varieties, eras, and potential value of the 1966 Australian 2-cent coin. So stay with me until the end, because sometimes the most ordinary-looking coin can have a story that is anything but ordinary. And if you love rare coins, valuable discoveries, and hidden treasures, make sure you subscribe to $1 Million Coin. To understand why the 1966 2-cent coin is interesting, we first need to go back to the beginning of Australia's decimal currency. Before 1966, Australia used the old pounds, shillings, and pence system. It was a complicated system that required people to understand different denominations and conversions. Then, on 14 February 1966, Australia officially introduced decimal currency, replacing the old system with dollars and cents. This was a massive change for the country. New coins entered circulation, people had to learn a completely different way of handling money, and the familiar old currency system began to disappear. The new decimal coins included 1 cent, 2 cents, 5 cents, 10 cents, 20 cents, and 50 cents, and all 6 of these original designs were created by the famous Australian designer Stuart Devlin. The 2-cent coin, therefore, wasn't simply another small piece of metal. It was part of a national transformation that changed the way Australians used money every single day. Now look closely at the reverse of this coin. Instead of a generic symbol, the designers chose a frill-necked lizard, one of Australia's distinctive native animals. The animal gives the coin a very strong Australian identity, and the design has remained associated with the 2-cent denomination since its introduction. Stuart Devlin designed and sculpted the reverse, and his work became one of the defining features of Australia's decimal coinage. When people look at these early decimal coins today, they are not simply looking at currency. They are looking at miniature examples of Australian art and design from the 1960s. The animal designs were carefully selected to represent Australia's unique wildlife, and each denomination received its own recognizable creature. The 2-cent coin received the frill-necked lizard, making it instantly identifiable to anyone familiar with Australian decimal coins. Turn the coin over, and the historical story continues. The obverse features Queen Elizabeth II, who was Australia's reigning monarch when the decimal currency was introduced. The portrait, the word Australia, the denomination, and the 1966 date together identify this as one of the earliest Australian decimal coins. Think about what that means. This coin was produced during the same year that millions of Australians were learning how to use their new decimal money. It could have been placed into a shopkeeper's cash register, carried inside someone's pocket, used to make a purchase, dropped on the ground, saved in a child's collection, or placed inside a jar and forgotten. Every circulated coin has a journey, and after nearly 60 years, we can only imagine how many hands may have touched an individual example. The physical specifications also tell us something about the coin. According to the Royal Australian Mint, the standard Australian 2-cent coin was composed of 97% copper, 2.5% zinc, and 0.5% tin. It is circular, has a plain edge, weighs 5.2 grams, and measures 21.59 millimeters in diameter. These details can be useful to collectors because weight, diameter, and composition can help confirm whether a coin is genuine and whether it matches the standard specifications. When a collector believes that a coin may have an unusual error or variety, These measurements can become part of the investigation. A coin that looks strange should never be declared rare simply because of its appearance. Serious collectors compare the physical characteristics with known specifications and recognized examples. But perhaps the most fascinating part of the 1966 2-cent story is that these coins were not produced in just one place. The Royal Australian Mint records show that 1966 2-cent coins were produced at multiple facilities. The published mintage figures list approximately 145.2 million coins from the Royal Australian Mint, 66.6 million from the Royal Mint Melbourne branch, and 217.7 million from the Royal Mint Perth branch. That is a huge number of coins, and it immediately gives us an important lesson about rarity. Coin being old does not automatically make it rare. In fact, the 1966 2-cent issue was produced in very large quantities. That means the date alone cannot turn an ordinary example into a $1 million coin. Instead, collectors need to look deeper into the specific example they have. This is where the world of varieties and minting errors becomes extremely interesting. When millions of coins are produced, the manufacturing process has to operate at enormous scale. Coins are struck using dies, blanks, and high-speed machinery, and while the process is highly controlled, unusual production mistakes can sometimes occur. A genuine mint error can be much more interesting to collectors than ordinary circulation wear. Depending on the type and rarity, errors can include unusual strikes, off-center strikes, double strikes, planchet problems, or other recognized manufacturing abnormalities. But there is a very important difference between an error created at the mint and damage that happened later. A coin that was bent, scratched, hit, scraped, chemically damaged, or deliberately altered after leaving the mint is not automatically a valuable mint error. That is why authentication is so important when someone believes they have discovered something extraordinary. Now let's talk about the condition of a 1966 Australian 2-cent coin. Condition can make an enormous difference in the world of numismatics. Imagine two coins produced on the same day. One enters circulation immediately and spends years moving through pockets, cash registers, and shops. It develops scratches, wear, dull surfaces, and loss of detail. The other coin is placed into a collection and protected from handling. Decades later, the second coin may still show sharp design details and much stronger original surfaces. Even though both coins have the same date and denomination, collectors may view them very differently. This is why professional grading can be important for coins that may have significant collector value. And now we arrive at the number that makes this coin especially exciting: estimated value $3 million. A $3 million estimate is an extraordinary figure, and it should immediately make us ask, what could possibly make a 2-cent coin worth that kind of money? The answer cannot simply be the year 1966. Millions of 2-cent coins were produced in that year, so the date by itself does not justify a multi-million-dollar price. For a specific example to be connected with a value as high as $3 million, there would have to be something extraordinarily rare about that particular coin. It might involve a highly unusual and authenticated minting error, an exceptionally rare variety, an extraordinary condition, or another characteristic that creates enormous collector demand. The important thing is that a headline or online listing is not enough to prove a $3 million value. A genuine valuation at that level would require expert authentication, strong evidence of rarity, and credible market evidence. This is a lesson every coin collector should remember. When you see an online claim saying that an old coin is worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars, don't immediately assume that every coin of that date has the same value. Ask what makes the particular example special. Is there a documented error? Is it a recognized variety? Has it been professionally authenticated? Has a comparable coin actually sold for anything close to the claimed amount? Is the price based on an auction result, or is it simply an asking price from an online seller? These questions matter because an asking price and a real market value are not the same thing. Someone can list a coin for $3 million, but that does not mean somebody has actually paid $3 million for it. So when we describe the 1966 Australian 2-cent coin as having an estimated value of $3 million, we are talking about the extraordinary valuation claim associated with a hypothetical or exceptional example, not saying that every ordinary 1966 2-cent coin is worth $3 million. That distinction is extremely important. The ordinary coin can be historically interesting without being a multi-million-dollar treasure. The real excitement comes from identifying whether an individual coin possesses a rare characteristic that separates it from the millions of ordinary examples. Now imagine finding this coin yourself. Maybe you discover it in an old family collection. Maybe you find it in a box that has not been opened for decades. Maybe someone gives you a handful of old Australian coins, and this one happens to be among them. The first thing you should do is resist the temptation to clean it. This is one of the biggest mistakes new collectors make. When people see an old copper-colored coin, they often think that polishing it will make it more attractive. They might use metal polish, chemicals, toothpaste, or other household products. But aggressive cleaning can damage the original surface and potentially reduce collector interest. If you believe a coin could be valuable, the safest approach is to leave its surface alone. Instead, examine it carefully. Look at the date. Look at the Queen's portrait. Study the frill-necked lizard. Examine the lettering. Look at the edge. Check whether anything appears unusual. If you have access to an accurate digital scale, you can compare the weight with the official specification. You can also carefully measure the diameter. These steps do not prove that a coin is rare, but they can help identify whether it matches the standard specifications and whether further investigation is worthwhile. Another important factor is the mint or production source. Because the 1966 2-cent coins were struck at multiple facilities, collectors can be interested in identifying the origin of particular examples. This is one reason why experienced collectors don't simply look at the large features. They study the smallest details. A tiny design characteristic may help distinguish one variety from another. Sometimes the difference can be so small that you need magnification to see it clearly. To a casual observer, two coins may appear identical. To a specialist, however, the difference may tell an important story about the production process. The history of the coin also becomes even more fascinating when you remember that Australia's decimal currency is now 60 years old. In 2026, Australia is celebrating 6 decades since the decimal changeover of 1966. The Royal Australian Mint has described the 1966 transition as a defining national moment and has highlighted Stuart Devlin's original animal designs as an important part of Australia's decimal heritage. The 2-cent coin is therefore not just an old denomination. It is a surviving piece of the beginning of Australia's modern currency era. But the story of the 2-cent coin did not continue forever. Australia eventually stopped issuing 1-cent and 2-cent coins for circulation. The decision was announced in 1990, with the coins subsequently withdrawn from circulation beginning in February 1992. The Royal Australian Mint notes that the decision was influenced by the loss of purchasing power through inflation and the cost of minting these low-value coins. Even after withdrawal, however, the coins retain their historical and collecting interest. That means a 1966 2-cent coin can now be viewed as a physical reminder of an Australian denomination that once played a normal role in everyday commerce but eventually disappeared from circulation. Think about that for a moment. When this coin was created, 2 cents could actually be used as everyday money. Today, the same coin is a historical object. Its face value has not changed, but its meaning has. It tells us about inflation, currency changes, Australian design, manufacturing, and the everyday life of people living in the 1960s and 1970s. That is one of the reasons coin collecting is so fascinating. A coin is not simply a piece of metal. It can be a time capsule. And this particular coin has another interesting feature. Its design has remained recognizable for generations. The frill-necked lizard reverse design was not changed from the introduction of the denomination. That continuity makes the 1966 example especially recognizable when compared with later Australian 2-cent coins. The animal on the reverse connects the earliest decimal issues with the later years of the denomination, creating a visual link across decades of Australian monetary history. Now let's imagine that someone tells you they have found a 1966 Australian 2-cent coin worth $3 million. What should you ask them? First, ask what makes it rare. If the answer is simply because it is 1966, that is not enough. Ask whether there is a recognized error or variety. Ask whether the coin has been authenticated. Ask whether it has been professionally graded. Ask for documented evidence of comparable sales. If the person cannot provide evidence, you should treat the claim cautiously. This is particularly important because coin collecting has become extremely popular online. Social media can spread dramatic claims very quickly. A photograph of an ordinary coin can be placed beside a huge price, and thousands of people may share it without checking whether the valuation is real. That doesn't mean every unusual coin story is false. Genuine rare coins absolutely exist, but the more extraordinary the claimed price, the more important it becomes to verify the evidence. And that is what makes the search exciting. You are not simply looking for an old coin, you are looking for the detail that makes the coin different. Maybe it is a rare variety, maybe it is a genuine mint error, maybe it has an unusual production characteristic, maybe it is an exceptionally preserved example, or maybe it turns out to be a normal coin with an important historical story. Either way, you learn something by investigating it. The 1966 Australian 2-cent coin also reminds us that rarity and value are not the same thing. A coin can be rare but have little demand. Another coin can be relatively common but highly popular. Value comes from the combination of scarcity, condition, desirability, authenticity, and what collectors are actually willing to pay. This is why professional references and documented auction results are so useful. They provide a better picture of the real market than a random internet listing. So if you have one of these coins at home, don't make the mistake of assuming it is either worthless or automatically worth millions. Treat it as something worth investigating. Keep it safe. Avoid cleaning it. Examine both sides carefully. Compare its specifications with trusted information. Look for recognized varieties and genuine errors. And if you believe you have something extraordinary, have it examined by a reputable numismatic professional. There is something almost magical about realizing that a coin that once had a face value of only 2 cents can still create so much curiosity decades later. The people who used these coins in 1966 probably never imagined that collectors in the future would be studying their designs, production details, and surviving examples. They were simply money. Today they are history, and perhaps that is the most important lesson from this entire story. Don't judge an old coin only by its denomination. Don't judge it only by its age. And don't believe a huge price simply because someone wrote it in a headline. Instead, look at the details. Learn the history, understand the production, study the varieties, check the condition, and most importantly, look for evidence, because the difference between an ordinary coin and an extraordinary coin may be something so small that you could miss it without knowing where to look. The 1966 Australian 2-cent coin may be small, but it represents the beginning of a completely new monetary era. It carries the frill-necked lizard, one of Australia's distinctive native animals. It carries the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. It was part of the Great Decimal Changeover of 1966. It was produced in enormous numbers across multiple facilities, and it survived long after the denomination itself disappeared from circulation. All of those things make it a fascinating piece of Australian history. And then there is the mystery of the $3 million estimated value. Could an extraordinary example ever command a figure that enormous? That would require an exceptionally rare and convincingly authenticated coin with extraordinary market demand. The ordinary 1966 2-cent coin should not be treated as a guaranteed $3 million coin, but if someone discovers an example with a truly unusual feature, the correct response is not to throw it away or clean it. The correct response is to investigate. So take another look at your old coins. Look at the dates. Look at the designs. Look at the tiny details. Check those old collections that have been sitting untouched for years. You may not find $1 million treasure, but you might discover something with a story that deserves to be preserved, because sometimes treasure isn't about finding a coin that instantly makes you rich. Sometimes treasure is finding a piece of history that survived long enough to reach your hands, and that is what makes the 1966 Australian 2-cent coin so fascinating. It is a tiny reminder of a huge national change, a product of Stuart Devlin's remarkable coin designs, a survivor from Australia's first decimal year, and a coin that continues to attract the attention of collectors decades later. So the next time someone tells you it's only 2 cents, don't be so quick to dismiss it. Turn it over. Ch.